In unincorporated LA County, which includes the Altadena fire area, there are 1,207 rebuild applications. 90 permits have been issued. 7%. This is so discouraging. You'd like to think that they could improve it, but it's almost as if they have an agenda that they don't want to improve it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Steve Hilton Show. Great to have you with us. We've got some amazing video later on that hasn't been seen enough. And I wanted to make sure that you had a chance to see it and hear it, because it's about Gavin Newsom. And it's not the Gavin Newsom video that you're probably sick of seeing right now. He's been in South Carolina this week. I'll get to that in a minute at the start of the show. But video of Gavin Newsom telling the world endlessly how fit Joe Biden was, how at the top of the game he was. And that is important in the context of the news that we've had this week about the cover-up of Joe Biden's ability to do his job. There's been subpoenas, there's been activity in the House, but there's one person who's been missing from that whole story who should be much more prominently in it. That is Gavin Newsom, and we'll show you why later in the show. And I've also got Susan Shelley joining me this week. We've got a fantastic conversation that you don't want to miss about an incredibly serious threat to the way of life that really defines California. That is coming up. But I want to start with the amazing contrast that we've seen in leadership style and substance between what we're getting at the federal level and what we're getting at the state level here in California. So at the federal level, you've seen President Trump, just before the July the 4th holiday, the deadline that he set, get through Congress his signature legislation, the One Big Beautiful Bill, which is an absolute triumph of will, really, because at the beginning of that whole process, people say, oh, you're never going to get it through. There's so many things that need to be squared off and different factions and different views within the GOP. And they've got tiny margins in the House and the Senate. And it's crazy to try and put everything in one thing like this. On and on. The naysayers went with that critique. And President Trump just kept going and in a very determined way put the pressure on, made it happen, of course, assisted by really impressive leadership from Mike Johnson in the House and John Thune in the Senate. Just an amazing job all around. And this incredible legislation was passed. Wherever you think of it, the significance of that is incredible. Obviously, the tax proposals that were really prominent in his presidential election campaign for 2024, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security. That's all in there. Again, people said, well, you can't do that because it costs too much. Well, they found savings. They made it work. But it wasn't just that. It was the massive commitments on the border, on immigration enforcement, on defense. I mean, all these things that he said in the campaign, the promises that he made are now delivered in this legislation. Because it's actual legislation, it actually will happen. It's an absolute triumph. I mean, again, whatever you think about the substance of them, and I know people have disagreements about many of these proposals, but the fact that you had this incredible, effective leadership to make this happen in less than 6 months, because he took office at the end of January the 20th. And then you contrast that with what we see from Gavin Newsom. And the reason we're thinking about that time frame for Gavin Newsom, of course, is because this week it was the 6-month anniversary of the Los Angeles wildfires. And we're going to talk about that with Susan in a moment. But Gavin Newsom, in those 6 months, has delivered almost nothing in terms of the priorities he laid out at the beginning of the year and the priorities he laid out in terms of rebuilding. And it's just an unbelievable joke, really, when you think about California, the 4th biggest economy in the world, as they constantly brag, the biggest state in the union by far, led by someone who just clearly doesn't know how to get anything done. And if you contrast not just the inaction, which I highlighted at a press conference in Los Angeles on the day of the 6-month anniversary of the wildfires, the just catastrophic failure to deliver on the promises that were made. But if you also add to that mix, also in this week, we had Gavin Newsom's budget. His version of the One Big Beautiful Bill was the One Big Beautiful Move on housing, as he might have called it, which was to solve the housing crisis, a game changer in housing and so on. These bills that he put in to, in his telling, get rid of all the obstacles to building housing in California. But as the days went on and we had a chance to look at what was actually there, much less to it than first met the eye far less to it than he was trying to convince everyone. And in the end, this massive game-changing legislation on housing turned out to be the same old story. The war on single-family homes, giveaways to the unions, nothing particularly new, far from the game changer that he dressed it up as. And so even in a state where he has massive majority, I mean, look at the difference, right? You have total control in California. Gavin Newsom, the Democrats control all the statewide offices, most of the counties and the big cities, and of course the legislature with a supermajority, a 2/3 majority. You compare that to President Trump, what he's dealing with in terms of the political makeup in Washington, where you have razor thin margin in the House, not much in the Senate, and yet Trump was able to achieve this incredible set of really consequential changes. And Gavin Newsom's done practically nothing. Why is that? Well, I think the other news this week about Gavin Newsom tells us the answer, which is that as soon as he was done with his event on the 6-month anniversary of the wildfires, as soon as that was out of the way, he was running off to South Carolina and focusing on what is obviously the only thing he's thinking about, which is running for president. Gavin Newsom isn't even thinking about doing this job. He's focused on the next job, and actually has been for years. That's why nothing gets done in California, because he's just not even interested in being governor of California. We can make all the points about how, he totally failed and the record is a disaster and so on, but that's because he's not even giving the pretense of trying to do anything. I mean, what's he spending his time on? Filing lawsuits against Trump and Jesse Waters at Fox News. This week, they were bragging about how his new strategy, Gavin Newsom's new strategy of trolling Trump, as they put it, is now increasing his social media following. That's what they're putting out as a benchmark of success, that he's increasing his social media followers by trolling President Trump. That's seriously what they put out this week. I mean, what an insult to every Californian. This is what he thinks of as success. I mean, it's just such a massive contrast. And the final contrast that I want to draw between these two pieces of news we had this week, the federal picture with President Trump and his bill, and Gavin Newsom with his budget and his legislation and his nothing burger of action on the wildfires, despite what he promised 6 months ago. I think it tells you a lot about the kind of mindset that we have in these two different positions. So with Trump, you've got someone with a business mindset. That's what I always said about him. He's not ideological. He's pragmatic. He approaches things like a problem-solving business guy. What's the problem? How do I solve it? You see that, by the way, we haven't even mentioned all the other things that have gone in Trump's favor in the last few weeks, days even. The Iran situation, we talked about that, Supreme Court rulings, all the things that, even in the early days of this administration, when, all the lawsuits were filed stopping him from firing federal workers, all these things, actually patiently they fought the cases and now they're winning the cases. So it's all going Trump's way, and on so many fronts at the same time. And it shows you what you get when you have someone with a business mindset who just focuses on outcomes. Whereas with Gavin Newsom and all those kind of people, the machine politicians that you get from these 15 years of one party rule, it throws up these machine politicians whose only skill is navigating the internal politics of the party machine. People like Karen Bass in Los Angeles, Kamala Harris, of course, Joe Biden's another example. They believe, I think sincerely, that saying something is the same as getting a result, that the input and the process is the same thing as an outcome, as a result. So you have Gavin Newsom saying 6 months ago, I signed an executive order. We're going to have a Marshall Plan for rebuilding LA, all this, and then nothing happens. And then you see the contrast is with Trump, who just like day after day is there getting things done. I remember a conversation years ago when I was hosting my Fox News show. I had an interview with the then HHS secretary, and he was telling me off camera just what Trump was like as a boss, just relentless, following up, chasing up, he's calling and 6 a.m. at the weekend saying, 3 months ago, you told me this would be done in 3 months. Is it? Where is it? That kind of attitude, progress chasing, problem solving, project managing on top of things until you get results. That is the business mindset. And that's what you need to get things done in government. I've been in government. I've worked there at the highest level. I've seen it from the inside. You've got to have that attitude. Whereas with these Democrats in charge in California, it's the exact opposite. It's the sort of politician, time server, bureaucratic attitude where it's all about the process, never about the results. And that's why the results are so bad. Whereas you see already at the federal level, the results are so good that, just every single issue you look at, gas prices across America, the lowest now for at least 4 years because of the quick action taken to unleash American oil production. Here in California, gas prices high and going higher as a direct result of their ideology. On and on every single issue. You've got progress, moving forward, results delivered in the Trump administration and federally. Here in California, just nothing, continuing to sink into stagnation and decline with the worst results of any state on pretty much every issue that matters. And the explanation of that, of course, it's partly ideological. It's partly that these people in charge in California have such bad ideas. But it's also about the temperament, the attitude, the mindset. And it's very clear that one works, the other doesn't. That's why I'm running for governor, because I have run businesses. I do have that mindset. I've done it. I've made things happen, business and in government. And I've encountered the obstacles. So I now know what they're going to throw my way. And so I'm relishing the prospect of doing that problem-solving, pragmatic attitude of getting things done and focusing on the results, not the inputs and the processes. That is the big difference. We saw it on display very, very clearly this week. Susan, fantastic to see you as always. I have to tell you, you're such a, people know you in our interactions on the show, but you're such a great source of advice and information and knowledge to me all the time, especially this week when I did an event on Monday to mark the 6th-month anniversary of the Los Angeles wildfires. We had some great conversations about that were really helpful and some of the points that I made that day. But let's start with that, the wildfires 6 months on. I know what I think. People may have seen what I put out at our event on Monday. Tell us what your take is on where we are today.
Well, I think the government of California has just not acted with urgency. And we saw that where Governor Newsom was bragging that he just signed an executive order on Monday to suspend certain building requirements and permitting requirements. And the reason he did it on Monday is because in January, he issued another executive order demanding a report. And the report was on which building codes may we suspend to help with rebuilding. And it took all this time. It took 6 months.
Are you kidding?
That's
amazing.
If you read the actual executive order that he signed on Monday, that's what it says. He asked the Housing and Community Development Department, the California Energy Commission, and the Fire Marshal's Office to provide a report on what codes could be suspended. 6 months it took them to do a report. And what they came up with that he just signed is the homes that are being rebuilt do not have to have solar panels. They're exempt now from the solar panel requirement, but they still must be constructed solar ready. So that adds costs. I don't know what that means exactly technically, but they're not exempt from being solar ready. And the other thing is there are new California building code standards that take effect January 1st of 2026. He's suspending those so that there isn't a huge rush to get in ahead of them, which would create this torrent of requests for building permits. But there's already a torrent of requests for building permits. I have some numbers here from NBC LA. In unincorporated LA County, which includes the Altadena fire area, there are 1,207 rebuild applications. 90 permits have been issued. That's only 7%. And in the city of Los Angeles, they're reporting that Building and Safety has received 360 rebuild applications. 70 have received permits, but that may not be fully accurate because apparently some are going back and forth where they're approved and then they're withdrawn, and there's some question about that Rick Caruso has raised. And interestingly, NBC interviewed someone who is with USC's Lusk Center for Real Estate, and he said in the city of Dallas, Texas, the median time to get a permit to rebuild is 8 days. 8 days. And we're at 6 months. And this is so discouraging. You'd like to think that they could improve it, but it's almost as if they have an agenda that they don't want to improve it.
8 days.
Yes, 8
And it's
days.
6
Median
months.
is
I
8
mean, it's
days.
the median, which means some is quicker than that.
Right,
Half. Some. Half. That's what median means. It's the midpoint. So
right.
half, 50% are less than 8 days.
Yes.
My
And
goodness.
California just isn't competing with that at all. And this is so frustrating because people want to rebuild, but California is imposing all of these new requirements on them and making life really difficult. And then 6 months in, they say, well, we'll suspend some of them.
It's so embarrassing. I mean, this is the thing that reminds me of the they make these big announcements, and this is the point that I made on Monday. He said on January, Gavin Newsom, in an interview with NBC, actually, in the Palisades, I think it was in Palisades, and he said, we're going to have a Marshall Plan to rebuild. Marshall Plan. They throw these things out, and then he said he said that, and this must be what he was referring to. He said, and the executive order I just signed, but the executive order was not doing anything. It was asking for a report.
Mm-hmm. One of them was asking for a report. There may have been more than one, but one of them was asking for a report. And now that he's got the report, whereas he has the report, he's going to suspend a couple of the requirements. But it's still very, very difficult to rebuild.
And the other thing like this was Karen Bass. I've talked about this before, but it's just such a perfect encapsulation of why they're like this. Was that she she put out a post that said, I have just signed an executive order streamlining permitting to rebuild LA, and you think, oh, okay, great, fine, something's happening. It's late, but whatever. And then, but the post is above a clip from her press conference. And if you actually watch what she actually said was, I've just signed an executive order tasking agency heads with developing paths forward to streamlining. And you just think,
and
these
there
people,
it is again.
It's same. And the thing that it's very, very important. I think it's a very deep point about everything that's not working in California, that's so broken, because you've got these people in charge, Newsom, Karen Bass, Kamala Harris is the same. There's so many of them. This is what you get from one party rule. It throws up these machine politicians whose only real skill is navigating the machine and, doing deals with the unions or whoever it may be, the activists, and to climb the ladder of their personal political advancement. But they don't have any sense of action in the real world, of what it takes to have follow through and project management and check that things are being done. I think they sincerely believe that saying something is the action, that the input to the process and the process itself is what matters rather than the results and the outcome.
I think you're exactly right. They want credit for the intentions and they want to make big statements that they're doing something. But when you look closely at what they're not doing anything. And then that's the result we get, the delays and the problems. This is very, very harsh for people because they have to pay living expenses and have to pay for the property that they want to rebuild on. They still have mortgages. They still have payments for property taxes. They still have expenses for all of that. And they have to live somewhere else. And it's terribly burdensome. Every month that this goes on is burdening people and pushing them to sell, pushing them out. Is that intentional?
Well, let's get to that. And just as a bridge to that, I do want to also make the point that if you look at the number and these numbers of, how many permits for rebuilding have been applied for, how many given, even the numbers of applications are very low in relation to the overall number of homes that were destroyed. I mean, I know the number of, I think it's 16,000 structures. That's not homes. There's not a precise number that I've seen, but I think it's in the region of 10,000, something like that, homes that were destroyed. And so we're getting a handful relative to that, where people are applying to rebuild. And it's because of a couple of things. The process is so off-putting, they're not even bothering to apply. They're being given the runaround by the insurance companies and the local agencies and the county and the city are like, you've got to get your insurance before we can give the permit. And then the insurance people say we need the permit. And it's just this nonsense of red tape that's making people give up, and they're leaving and selling up. And you're seeing that in a lot of cases. And now let's get to that point, which is another thing that I dug up that Gavin Newsom said in January. He said, we are already at work reimagining and reimagining, as that phrase they use the whole time, and it was LA 2.0. So what is that? And then you look at everything that's happening and you see yet again the extremism and the ideology coming in, which is what they clearly want to do, is to turn the Palisades into a test case for their ideology that's running rampant across the state, which is this war on single-family homes, saying we don't approve of single-family homes. They're bad for climate. We want to force everyone to live in apartments near transit, not have a car. This whole agenda, which you've been chronicling. And it seems to me that that's what's going on in the Palisades.
Certainly looks that way. They talk about rebuilding in an equitable way. Well, that was a very wealthy area, and what do they mean, an equitable way? Does that mean the people who lived there don't have the right to rebuild what they had before, and they're going to be stopped from having what they had before because it's no longer considered equitable? In whose assessment? This You get into an issue here of property rights, and the property rights include the right to enjoy your property. It's not just to own your property, it's to use and enjoy your property. And that's the right that's being infringed by many of these laws. They want to change the land use and the zoning that people rely on when they buy a property. So for instance, if you buy a single family home anywhere in California, there are laws that are pending that could turn your next door neighbor from a house into an apartment building. 6, 7-story apartment building right next door to your house. You could be sandwiched in by 4 or 5 of them around you, and your city would not be able to even do anything about it. There'd be no approval process by which you could describe the impact. They couldn't do this to you if you were a spotted owl or a Delta smelt. You would have a right to your habitat. But if you're human in a single family home, you don't have any rights because sustainability, environmental something or other, climate change, the need for transit, whatever the excuse is, whatever the emergency is that they're calling it, the aim is to eliminate single family zoning in California. To an extent, this has already been done. Senate Bill 9 a few years ago created a by right ability to subdivide a single family lot and have 4 residences on it, 2 houses and 2 ADUs, accessory dwelling units. That's already in place, but people have not been doing it. And one of the reasons that it's underutilized from their point of view is that people have to live in it. It has to be owner-occupied according to the law. That was one of the concessions to get the votes to pass it. And I think people don't want to live in that level of density on their single-family home street. So it's not really happening. Also, there's a huge property tax impact if you split your lot and have 2 houses and 2 ADUs. That's all new construction, and that will be reassessed to market value, and market value is very high. And of course, market value is based on location. So
just to be clear on that one,
Mhm.
does that mean the property tax on the entire property is at the new value, even for your existing home?
Well, for the improvements, if you put up a second home and 2 ADUs where there was 1 house, and let's say you don't change the first house at all, well, 3/4 of that property, the new construction that you've put up, is reassessed to current market value when it's constructed. And if you tear down the 1 house, then you have 4 new units of new construction reassessed to market value. So the land would still be under the Prop 13 base year value, but the new construction would be reassessed. And I think when people do the math on that, they think it's not such a great idea to tear down their house and put up 4 units.
So let's go through the process, because that was the one that was heralded by the activists, the climate extremists who want this, as the SB 9. That was about 4 years ago, I think. That's the end of single family zoning in California.
Yes, it was.
So you couldn't. It was illegal from then on to require single family only. But that didn't do the job for them, because they didn't see this explosion of ADUs for all the reasons you've outlined. So what next? What are the other things that they've done? What in this war on single family homes? What are the next moves for them?
Well, the new one that's pending is Senate Bill 79, which has passed the Senate and is now in the Assembly, and it's set for one more committee hearing, I believe on the 16th in the Local Government Committee, 16th of July, and then it would be on the floor. And what that says is that for any single-family lot within a half-mile radius of transit, and transit is defined all the way down to a qualifying bus stop, any single-family home can be sold, demolished, and turned into a 6 or 7 story apartment building up to 75 feet high if it's within half a mile of transit. Now, the cities will not be able to have any approval process. The local homeowners will not be able to participate in any kind of impact study. It's exempt from everything. It has to be approved ministerially because it's near transit. And of course, because of another law, the buildings don't have to have any parking spaces. So the assumption is that they'll build apartment building after apartment building on these single family streets. No one will have cars? Really? Everyone will walk a half a mile to the transit for everything they're going to do? Of course they'll have cars. Where are they going to park? All over the surface streets, everywhere that they can, on the lawns, if there are still lawns. People will be parking everywhere. It is the destruction of the neighborhood to allow this.
And this is
no way to stop
everywhere
it.
in California.
Everywhere in California that's within half a mile of transit as
And a
defined.
county and a city. No, I mean, it's a complete abrogation of any kind of local control over development.
Yes. And one of the worst things about it is that they're trying to bail out the transit systems from their fiscal cliff by doing this. It says so in the legislation. It says in order to provide a funding stream to support transit. Well, transit
What's the funding stream? How does that
the
work?
funding stream. Well, the idea is that you force people to use transit because they have no parking spaces. So you build these apartments and you fill them up with people and they will use the transit.
Wait. That's in the bill? In SB 79?
In SB 79, one of the purposes of the bill is to create ridership, more fare box revenue for these transit systems that have seen declining ridership.
It is absolutely, it's horrific. It's total. I mean, it's so funny. I find myself, this is the second, that's not the first time it's happened, where you hear things and you think, well, that can't be right, and well, maybe that's a little bit over the top. And I remember when hearing, when we first moved here, 2012, and people talk about, some of the Democrats as communists and the ideas as communists. And I thought, that's a bit over the top. My parents are Hungarian and I experienced communism and I know what it's like. And this isn't, you call it socialism, but communism a bit too far. And then as the years went on, you see some of the things they're doing, and especially on silencing dissent and so on. And now you have the Fast Food Council, which is in California, which is basically the fast food industry effectively run by the government and the unions. And you think, yeah, maybe it's fair. When this first started, this whole, people talk about it as the 15-minute city thing, isn't it? That they want everyone in apartments without cars, and so on. And there's a connection to something at Davos at the World Economic Forum that was about, I don't quite, haven't seen all of the paperwork around that. Maybe you could, tell us a bit more about that. And you think, well, that's a bit extreme, but no, it's not. I mean, this is exactly, and what you've just said, that it's in the bill. It's literally these people telling you how to live. They're saying,
yes,
you must do this. And it's so offensive. Like, what are you talking about? How dare you? This is California in America. No.
It is a tremendous bait and switch. In Los Angeles County several years back, there was a measure on the ballot, Measure M, which was an increase in the sales tax of, I believe, another 0.5%. And then it took a temporary 0.5%, made it permanent, a previous measure. And this was funding for transit. So they're building out all this transit and people are not using it. Part of it is that COVID knocked the ridership down to almost zero, and then it has not come all the way back. But there are other reasons. There's crime and drugs and homelessness on the trains and issues on the buses with safety, issues on the platforms with safety.
And it's totally inconvenient because the network isn't there. We were built differently in California. We developed differently. We're not some, all higgledy-piggledy, dense city from medieval times like Paris or London or whatever. It's ridiculous. Or even New York, it's just totally different. And so, I tried it once. I tried just to sort of see what it'd be like. I remember with my sons in LA, we'd say, okay, I'm going to use transit. It's just a nightmare to get anywhere. You have the metro is ridiculous. It's completely badly planned. To get anywhere, right, you have to go, all the lines connect into Union Station. You have to go out again. You can't connect across the lines. It takes forever to get anywhere. The stops are few and far between. Then you need to get on a bus. The buses never come. They're totally disconnected. It's same in the Bay Area. I tried to when I got here, I remember you think I had my bike. I used to cycle around London. I thought I'll try that here. I went from the mid peninsula near Palo Alto to Berkeley. And it took like 2.5 hours to go all the different modes, and it doesn't make sense. And you drive there in 40 minutes. So but that's California. So instead of going, it's classic. It is the Marxist, socialist, communist mode of thinking, which is we want to perfect society. We want this utopia. We don't care what people think or how they want to live. We know best. This is how they should live, and we're going to force them to do it.
That's right. And it's a huge jobs program for union members who support the parties in power. And this is how government makes decisions. It makes decisions based on influence, not based on the market. So people didn't ask for these transit lines, but now we've got the transit lines, and now they don't have ridership. So they want to force ridership by building housing near transit and not allowing any cars. And then they think that it'll bring the passengers to the transit.
It's absolutely outrageous. Which was the bill that banned the parking?
I think if 11 something, I can't off the top of my head, I don't know, but I think it was a Buffy Wicks bill, and it removed the requirement for parking spaces in certain buildings near transit. So they don't have to have a parking lot. They don't have to have a parking structure or anything.
It's really insidious. I mean, I want to say it's evil. I mean, it's just really.
And then you have the CEQA exemption that was just pushed through in the budget bill. The CEQA exemption, the California Contract Cities Association, which is the Southern California area, it's 80-some cities in the Inland Empire and LA County. They're complaining that this process of taking this CEQA exemption out of a bill that was going through the legislative process and putting it in a budget trailer bill, and then making the budget passage contingent on the approval later of this measure, this budget trailer bill. Otherwise, the budget that the governor signed would be invalid, and it would be they'd have to start that again. It was just shoved right through, and this is a CEQA exemption for infill housing. So now they don't need parking. They don't have to go through CEQA to give people an opportunity to raise issues about the impact of the project on the environment and the neighbors. They don't have the process for that. And now they're going to create this unlimited, unreviewable right to put up an apartment building on a single family lot along these transit corridors within half a mile. This is absurd. Where is the infrastructure for it? Oh, there's nothing in the bill about that.
It's so extreme and
Yes.
authoritarian and autocratic.
Yes. And if you're a homeowner, in California, these taxes have to go on the ballot. So whether it's a bond for infrastructure or it's a parcel tax for infrastructure, only homeowners pay that. Only the property owners pay. So now you put apartment buildings in, you fill them up with people who are not owners and do not have to pay that tax. And how are they going to vote? They're going to vote, sure, tax somebody else. So now all the homeowners, not only have they been impacted by having an apartment building built right next door or across the street or behind them, or all three, but now they're going to get a tax bill for the infrastructure that's needed to support that increased population. It's hideous. It is an absolute...
And the new population doesn't pay the property tax.
That's correct. Renters do not pay the property tax. I mean, possibly they pay through higher rent, but not immediately. They don't see it that way.
And just to sort of confirm all this, just today we saw a post from Gavin Newsom from the official California governor account. I'm just reading it now. Just confirming everything we've been saying, what I said on Monday. I'm just quoting, with California HC, that's Housing and Community Development Department, we're delivering $101 million to help rapidly rebuild affordable multifamily rental housing for Angelenos displaced by the January wildfires. I mean, they're just open about it now.
Tax dollars being used to subsidize a particular kind of housing, but not to enable the rebuilding of the housing that was there before, that was destroyed. And by the way, it was destroyed through the mismanagement of California, through the mismanagement of water services, through the mismanagement of land. This is not just a natural disaster. This is a foreseeable catastrophe that the government did nothing to prevent.
Exactly. And the policies of It was again the climate extremism that meant that the brush wasn't cleared. You had the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, state agency there relevant to the Palisades fire, running around fining people who were clearing their themselves clearing the brush because they knew the risks, and they were trying to clear the brush and they were being fined for it. I mean, just insane. But the thing is that about the let's just go back to this bill. What about this argument from charter cities? That's what Huntington Beach powerfully used in their rejection of mandatory housing numbers from Gavin Newsom and his people in the state administration. Charter cities have a degree of freedom constitutionally, and about a quarter of the cities in California, I think there's something like 480 or so cities in California, roughly 160 or so that are something like that are charter cities. Does this apply? And they're supposed to have more autonomy. Does this apply to them as well?
It does. The bill says that this is a matter of statewide concern, and so it overrides home rule. I think that's what it says, and so it would apply everywhere. If it didn't apply to charter cities, then the charter cities are all the largest cities, then it wouldn't have much impact at all. But they want the density, so if it doesn't apply to charter cities, they might as well not do it. So it applies to charter cities. They could go to court and challenge it. But all of these exemptions together, the parking exemption from the parking requirements, the exemption from the CEQA review, the ministerial approval where cities can't do any approval process for these apartment buildings going up on side streets, all of this is piecemeal. And what it adds up to is the destruction of the California lifestyle. It adds up to you buy a single family house and pretty soon you are living in urban density all around you. You have to drive around the block 3 times and hope to find a parking space every time you
Well,
leave
I know
your
it
house.
very well. I mean, this is London. I mean, okay, what can we do? So you're saying there's a committee hearing on July the 16th. In which one was it? The Senate?
I think it's the Assembly Local Government Committee. And what people can do is they can look up their assembly representatives, because it will have to go to a floor vote. If it gets out of the local government committee, it will have to go to a floor vote in the assembly. And it only needs a simple majority to pass. It doesn't need 2/3. So what you can do is call your assembly representative and say, vote no on SB 79 and do not destroy the single family lifestyle in California.
And it only needs a majority because it's a regular bill. What actually, doesn't everything just need a majority now? Because they reduced it was 2/3 for the budget. Now that's 50. Everything is a majority.
That's a simple majority. Tax increases need a 2/3 vote. A constitutional amendment from the legislature needs a 2/3 vote.
But they have that anyway because they got a supermajority.
They do, but a bill that's declared urgent needs a 2/3 vote. But normal legislation, simple majority. But even though there's a supermajority, there are a lot of people in the legislature who do not want to be voted out of office. And if they hear from their constituents that something is of concern, it will get their attention. So I think this is a really important turning point. This is one of those things where once the problem starts, everyone will say, how did this happen? And this is the day when you can stop it from happening. So act immediately.
What does the timeline look like? So there's a mid-July committee hearing and then a vote. And so when could we roughly expect this to come to the final vote?
Could be as soon as the 16th or 17th of July.
Straight after the committee?
As soon as it gets out of the next committee, it could go to the floor. And
wow, that's next week.
Yes. And, there's no guarantee that the governor would sign it, but there's no reason to think that he wouldn't because he favors this kind of thing. And once again, this is all based on the false premise that somehow this helps the climate or somehow this helps the environment. And all it does, it's just about money. These buildings have to be built with prevailing wage labor. That's a concession to the unions. And then they have to be near transit to try and get the transit agencies off the fiscal cliff that they've gotten themselves into because they're unusable and horrible and badly managed and probably overstaffed. And so for all those reasons of management, now they want a bailout. And the federal government under President Trump is not bailing them out. And that is really the big thing that's changed. The Biden administration was willing to bail out California government, and the Trump administration is not. And that's part of the story all the way through, that the Trump administration wants a change in California's policies to solve the problems of water management, of land management, of all of it. And the Trump administration is not interested in bailing out the terrible decisions made by these leaders.
And I think that's right. And I've always made the argument, we need to save, we can't sort of look for salvation elsewhere. We need to do it here in California. We need to change the policies, change the direction. That's why I'm running for governor, to do that. I think that's completely right. But let's just, the point we haven't got into, and I think is very important, and let's probably leave it with this one, Susan, is this way of living that they want to force onto everyone else. That's not how they live. That's not how Gavin, like I made this point on Monday. Gavin Newsom doesn't live in an apartment above transit with no car. He lives in a lovely single family home in Marin County. They've just bought a new one. I don't begrudge that at all. I want everyone to have the California dream. I love that people are successful, make money. That's fair, by the way, make money in the private sector, creating and running businesses and delivering products and services that people want to pay for. Don't get rich off being in the government. So that's a separate point. But generally speaking, I want everyone to, rise up and climb the ladder of opportunity. That's the American dream. That's the California dream. And these people, I'd love to know, maybe we can do a little bit of digging. These people who are going to be voting in favor of SB 79, where do they live? Do they live in apartments above transit with no car?
Well, this can all be fixed. As you said, this can all be fixed. One thing that would help is to remove the so-called urban boundary, which is an imaginary line beyond which you're not allowed to develop.
Exactly.
And that is the simplest thing to fix. And why don't they fix it? Because they believe that driving is bad for the climate. But if driving to work in California is so bad for the climate, this is a ridiculous argument. The whole state of California contributes 1% to global greenhouse gases. So it's a ridiculous argument to say if we don't build a suburb, it helps the climate. All it does is raise the cost of housing and create just this abrasiveness in our society where people feel like it's musical chairs and there isn't enough to go around for everybody. There's plenty to go around, and we could certainly develop more single-family housing for people who want to buy single-family housing, and we can preserve it for people who want to preserve it.
And the calculation that we made when I did policy report on this at my organization, Golden Together, was that if you increase the we already have, they keep talking about density. We already have pretty much the highest density in the country in California. Only about 5% of our land is developed if you look at the whole state. And if you increased it from 5 to 6%, 1% extra, that would enable 10 million single family homes to be built. And so on quarter acre lots, which is a lot. And all the services that go with it, there's plenty of room. Can you just, the urban boundary, where is that enshrined? What is the action that would unblock that?
I think that's a city by city thing. I don't think there's a state law that creates urban boundaries. I think it's a city planning device that's used to limit the approval of housing in a region. So it might be from the regional councils of government, or it might be from the cities themselves, but it's an artificial construct designed to prevent development outside of the urban core and the existing suburbs. And so it's detrimental as people grow up and want to form their own households and want to buy a single family home and have a driveway for the basketball hoop and a yard for the dog. They should be able to do that. And they shouldn't feel like they have to find senior citizens and push them out of their houses with tax increases in order to have the house that they want for their families. So it's the lack of new construction in the market-based housing that people want to buy. Of course, the other thing is that they're pushing private landlords out of the business by rent control and various other. In Los Angeles, they're constantly creating reasons that you can't evict people or collect the rent, let alone raise the rent. You can't collect the rent. So they're pushing private landlords out of business. Why? Well, they want to buy those older buildings and tear them down and put up brand new construction and give the contracts to friends and cronies. And this is a big problem in California.
It's really serious, this SB 79. We've very, very much got to mobilize against this. You've been fantastic alerting us all to it. I know you wrote about it in your column in the Southern California News Group papers and outlets, and you'll be keep fighting the good fight, I know. It could be next week, so this is very urgent. I'm actually in Sacramento next Friday, I believe, so maybe we'll do something about it then and there. All right, Susan, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Steve.
All right, as promised, the missing person in the investigation into the cover-up of Joe Biden's decline. And again, every time we talk about this, I've got to make the point. This was deliberate. The reason that they put him in there in the first place, it all goes back to South Carolina, ironically, where Gavin Newsom is this week. And that was the primary where Jim Clyburn swung it Joe Biden's way, and the machine got all the other candidates to stand down, even though Biden had catastrophically lost the first few primaries. So it goes back to 2020. They wanted him in there. They knew at the time, they all knew that he couldn't do the job. We, on my Fox show, we'd been playing clips of Biden's calamitous performances. I mean, it wasn't even, we stopped even calling it a joke or a gaffe because it was so embarrassing. Months before the 2020 election, never mind towards the end of his first term when people really started talking about it. So we were onto this all along. We all knew he couldn't do the job, but the Democrats, the Democrat machine, the insiders, they knew that because he was so hopeless and collapsing mentally, that meant they would be in control. That's what they wanted. They wanted a puppet president that they could control. That's what it was about all along. They loved that whole situation. They called themselves the Politburo, or they were called the Politburo. It's all in Jake Tapper's book. The senior advisors around Biden, they loved the fact that he was just this figurehead, this puppet president, and they were pulling the strings. And right at the beginning, that was set up when they put him in there in the first place. And of course, as he became president and the decline was more and more visible, more and more people started talking about it, then the cover-up happened. And now, of course, with Jake Tapper's, in a way, a helpful book because it reveals how deep the cover-up went and how much everyone knew about it at the time. But of course, it's a disgraceful book in another way because Jake Tapper and the rest of the journalists should have been telling the story instead of helping and trying to be part of the cover-up. But anyway, we are where we are. The truth is now coming out. And of course, you've got official investigations into what actually happened, because there are serious points here. It's not just embarrassing. Of course, it is embarrassing to have a president that can barely string a sentence together, wandering around aimlessly on stage and at the G7 summit, and all those terrible pictures that we saw that we kind of want to forget from the Biden years. Of course, that's embarrassing for our country, but it's serious as well because there are actual policy things that were involved here. I mean, people are talking about the pardons and the use of the auto pen, and did Biden even know who he was pardoning? But it goes to policy as well. Remember that shocking story from Mike Johnson when he was describing a conversation that he had with Biden when Biden was president, where Johnson was challenging him on an executive order that Biden had signed in relation to liquefied natural gas exports. And Biden said, no, I didn't do that. I didn't sign. That's not what I signed. And Johnson said, it really is. And he was so shocked. The speaker said, he clearly didn't know that he'd done this thing that he did. So the question is, what other areas of policy did that happen in? What other things happened from this president in name only? And who was making these decisions? So these are really serious issues. It's a massive scandal. And there must be accountability. I've said all along, and not just, a nice report that's written that names some names. This is criminal. I mean, there's a total fraud on the electorate. It's absolutely outrageous, and there needs to be serious accountability. Of course, the first step in that is an investigation. That is what's going on right now. James Comer is really pushing hard on that. Good for him. And they're doing subpoenas, and you've got people being summoned to the Hill to give evidence behind closed doors at this point. And you've got, Karine Jean-Pierre and a bunch of others have been summoned and they've given evidence. But the interesting thing that happened this week, the doctor, Biden's doctor, pleaded the fifth. Then now he's not saying anything. I mean, how damning is that? But there's one person, as I said at the top of the show, there's one person missing from all this who's managed to, so far, wriggle away from it, from culpability. Because actually, when you think back to those times, in a way, the most kind of rah booster of Biden, this guy's amazing, going out on all the shows, constantly telling everyone how fantastic Biden was, even more than Kamala Harris, the vice president, actually, of course, up to her neck in the cover-up. But the person, in a way, who was the biggest and most vocal frontman, and therefore, in a way, carried the cover-up publicly more than anyone else, it was Gavin Newsom. And if you don't remember that, here's a reminder.
Not only the last 3 years have been extraordinary, I've been out with, as you know, on the campaign trail. I was just out in California. I've seen him up close. I've seen him from far. But here's my point. It's because of his age that he's been so successful.
Do you think he's cognitively strong enough to be
I
president?
have conversations with him all the time, yes. And I'll tell you what.
You do?
I'm dead serious about that. I've talked to him when he's been overseas. I've been in Air Force One, Marine One. I've been in the limo with him.
I've been on Air Force One. I've been in the Marine One with him. I've been in the back of that limo. Quiet times, loud times. I've been there when he's prepping. I've been there when he's 2 hours on a photo line and then is just winding up. And he's got 2 more events after that. This guy is next level energy in private. If he was in a room like this, he'd light you guys up.
Time I've spent with the president in quiet times, in the back of the car, in public events, large and small. I've had a disproportionate amount of time to spend with him because of many of the crises, climate-related, fossil fuel-induced crises in the state of California. And I've just experienced a different appreciation for his energy and his capacity. We have the opportunity to universally have the back of this president who's had our back. You don't turn your back. You go home with the one that brought you to the dance. 100% all in. And I was very, very proud that he was able to articulate the work that he has done. I will take Joe Biden at 100 versus Ron DeSantis any day of the week at any age. In fact, all of the folks
you think he's up to the job? You think he's 100%?
I've been spending
100%?
plenty of time with Joe
100%?
Biden in
Okay.
private and
Let him
public.
answer.
You don't know. And by the way, results matter.
Next level energy. What a shameless liar. I mean, first of all, that's just unbelievable to see that, right? Just the lying. I mean, we call it gaslighting. It's just lying. Of course, it's not true. I mean, now because we now know that when Gavin Newsom was saying all of that, thanks to Jake Tapper's book, we know that inside the White House, all the people around him were saying the exact opposite. So we know that Gavin Newsom was lying, not gaslighting. That is much too gentle a term. Gavin Newsom was lying because he can't have seen the idea that there's this unique, different Biden that only appeared when Gavin Newsom was around in the back of the bus or whatever the hell he was talking about. What a joke. But it's an insult to everyone's intelligence. And as you saw from that, I mean, he was the leader of the cover-up. The leader of the cover-up. You've got Kamala Harris, of course, the vice president, who had a constitutional obligation and duty to tell the truth about what was going on. She totally failed to do that. We all know why, because she was hoping to take over. She was hoping that he would somehow get reelected and then he'd step down and then she'd become the president, yet again, getting a job without actually having to be elected to it. So that was her deal. But then Gavin Newsom, why was he doing it? Again, it has to be the only explanation is personal political advancement. He clearly believed that it was in his interests for Joe Biden to run again, be elected, and then Gavin Newsom, could run after Biden's second term or whatever. I think that there's no question when you see that Gavin Newsom must be called to give evidence to this inquiry. He must be called to testify. He keeps telling us there. He saw this perfect version of next level energy from Joe Biden. Why didn't anyone else see that, as we now know from these insider accounts? It is a real scandal, and Gavin Newsom is also, just like Kamala Harris, up to his neck in it. All right, that's our show for today. Thank you very much for being with us. We've got a fantastic episode of Big Ideas Book Club, by the way. Do check out our other show there. Michael Malice, who's incredibly funny, and you may have seen him on Gutfeld and other places. Got a great show of his own, and he's written a brilliant book about the first 100 days of Trump. But we had a wide-ranging conversation about Trump and politics and a lot of UK politics, which, to my amazement, Michael knows a lot about. So do check out Big Ideas Book Club, our next episode. And please follow us on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Tell all your friends. Support my campaign for governor, Steve Hilton for governor.com. And we'll see you here back next week for the next episode of The Steve Hilton Show.